Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Outliers YouTube channel and our program, Get to Know. I'm your host, DP Lyle, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Kathleen Antrim.
Thanks, Doug. I'm really excited. Today, we've got a very special treat for you. He's one of the best novelists, I think, kind of in current day. He's got 7 books out. He's critically acclaimed, and he's obviously a bestseller. David Corbett, welcome to Get to Know.
Well, thank you for having me, Kathy and Doug.
Well, we're happy to have you here. It's been too long since I saw you, my friend.
It's been way too long.
Way too long.
For some reason, I had a pause there in your feed. So I have a question for you. I want to go back to your childhood. This is one of my favorite questions. And I want to ask if you think that your childhood and the way you grew up had anything to do with you becoming a writer. Were you an introverted child, an extroverted child? Did you read a lot? Did you have any imaginary friends? So, fill us in.
Yes, in a word. My mom was a devoted reader, and she introduced me to the library. She would always go to the library at least once a week, and it was always take me along. And so I was encouraged to read from an early age. I also hated school. Hated school. It wasn't just because of the nuns, but they didn't help. They were Dominicans. I say, the daughters of the Inquisition, and leaned heavily on the punishment side of penance. And our pastor was a former boxer named George Foley, who created one of the most terrifying moments of my life. When I signed my own report card, I had all A's, A and F, and he was actually reading it. He was, oh, not too bad, Corbett. Oh, A in this, really good. Oh, an effort, excellent. You signed your own report card, and blew up like a nuclear explosion, and said, Corbett, this is so bad, I got to go home and think about what I'm going to do to you.
Oh my God.
And I lived in terror of this man for a year, until next year when we were doing confirmation catechism lessons. And he was trying to distinguish between a mortal sin and a venial sin, which for you non-Catholics are the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor in heaven.
I was raised Catholic. I get it.
Okay, so and anyhow, so he's trying to distinguish about whether something is a felony, a mortal sin or a venial sin. And he says, Medallia, this was Molly Medallia. Suppose you push good old Corbett there down the steps. And I went, I didn't even register that I had just been pushed down the steps. It registered. He called me good old Corbett. He forgot.
You're hoping.
It was the best day of my life. It was just this burden lifted off of me. And so in any event, I didn't like school. That's one example of why. Also, my brothers made enemies. Somebody, said, oh, you're Jim Corbett's little brother. I said, yeah. He picked me up and threw me into a wall. And well, that's the last time I answer yes to that question. So, it was no fun. So I would feign getting sick. I would actually stick a toothbrush down my throat just to throw up a little something so I could stay home. And my mom would bring me books. I went through the entire Hardy Boys, I read We Were There books, which I loved, which were like, they're history books from the point of view of kids. We were there at the Battle of the Bulge. We were there on the Oregon Trail. We were there with the Pony Express. And I just devoured these things. So reading was, for me, just the balm of my existence. I just completely, and then I got into military history and stuff like that as time went on. I was a guy. So, and then I read sports books. Tex Small, a sports writer for Sports Illustrated, had a whole bunch of books about a high school in Sonora. I think it was meant to be New Mexico, or might have been California. And then there was also books on pro football and pro baseball, and I devoured all of those. And that was pretty much it. My childhood was really about reading until I discovered music, and then I got into music as well. But
wow. And you became a private investigator, and you spent many years doing that later on. How did you end up there?
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was not a private investigator as a child. I was an interesting
yeah.
Although I have, when people said, how did you become a private investigator? My joke answer has been, well, I was abducted by a roving band of detectives as a child, and they taught me the tricks of the trade. That is, of course, not the real answer.
Sounds like a YA novel to me.
Yeah. Struggle and how to follow people. Now I was this is kind of a long story. So I get to college. I have no idea what I want to do. But I do get seduced by this roving band of mathematicians, as it were. I got into honors math, even though I didn't test into it. I hated my high school math teacher, another nun. She hated me. It was mutual. So I ended up majoring in math just because I loved my professors so much. They were the smartest, kindest, most generous, most intellectually honest people I met, you know. And so I was just kind of taken in by that. And I thought, well, I'll use math in one way or another for whatever I do, because it teaches you how to think. And it teaches how, when an argument is stupid or wrong, there was a word we used called hand waving, like a magician, and like, somebody was just flailing in an argument, we said, oh, hand waving. So I majored in math, and then I got a fellowship to Berkeley in linguistics because I'd won a poetry prize, and I had majored in math, and they thought, wow, this guy knows the science and he can do it. But by the time I got to Berkeley, I just came to the realization that I'd been in school too long. I was one of those middle-class white males who scored 99 percentile on every standardized test I ever took. It's like, I came out of the womb, the first words out of my mouth were, you may break the seal and begin. And I just thought, I gotta get out into the real world. I gotta get my heart broken and my nose bloodied and just get out of school. So I did, and I studied acting. And this was really, I didn't really take any literature courses in college. I was really, pretty much focused on math. So
did you do all 4 years at Berkeley?
Oh, no. I did 4 years at Ohio State, Ohio State University. And then I went to Berkeley, and I was like, just pretty much after a couple of weeks, I said, nah, I'm out of here. So I went, studied acting in Berkeley. And that's when I first really began to read critically, and in particular, reading plays. And the lesson from that is, if it's not shown, it's not there. You don't have access to people's thoughts. So learning how to use dialogue and setting to tell the whole story, and also how to write in scenes, was just that's basically where I kind of learned how to write. But then, to make money, I was working as a paralegal. And here's the funny part. 2 people I was in acting school with were working for this private investigator in San Francisco. And I was kind of on the fence. I was writing short stories and getting some attention there. And, I was doing some auditions and getting a little bit of attention there, but I was just, which way do I want to go? And they said, well, if you want to write, you should get a job here because you can't beat this place for material. And that proved to be an understatement. It took me 9 months of persisting to get them to hire me. And they hired me because they said I was the most persistent applicant they'd ever had. And then at my 3-month review, Jack Palladino, my boss, said, we knew you'd be able to write and you were smart, but we didn't realize you'd have this good an attitude. And I just loved the job. I mean, you go out there, find it, find people, get them to talk to you, and write it up. And Hal Lipsett, the granddaddy of San Francisco private investigators, who's featured in the Coppola film, The Conversation, is played by Gene Hackman.
Yep.
And he's based on Hal Lipsett, who was basically the guy who trained my bosses, and then they trained me. And Hal said, you can teach somebody all the technical stuff. I mean, that's not hard. The thing you can't teach somebody is how to get someone else to talk to them. And I'm just good at it. And so I decided these would be my years at sea, as it were. This is where I'd get the material for my books. And, I worked there for about somewhere between 13 and 15 years. It was on and off a little bit.
Wow.
Really cool cases. Ronan Farrow is doing a profile on the firm that I worked for. And it's based on Ronan met Jack, my boss, Jack Palladino, when he was working on the Weinstein case. Jack was working for the defense.
Oh.
And Jack even called me at one point. I hadn't worked for him in like 15 years. But he calls me up and says, you know, I got this great job for you, David. And it's like, and you can just be yourself. You'll be a writer and you'll be interviewing various Hollywood people and just kind of like you're doing a story on, you know, Hollywood and all the rumors. See if you can kind of get them to, you know, admit that, you know, some of their stories about Harvey are not, you know. I mean, it's almost like you said, we'd like you to swallow some nuclear waste so we can figure out if you'll get sick or not. I mean,
and your cover is being a writer.
Oh yeah, like I want David Corbett to be the guy. Oh, he's the guy who worked for Harvey Weinstein. Think of all the doors that would open.
Oh,
so and Jack, of course, being Jack Palladino, he was, you know, born to be a private eye with a name like that. You know, remember the show? You know, the Paladin, San Francisco.
Have gun will travel. Absolutely.
And we were in San Francisco, so it was so perfect. And I finally just said, look, I can't. My father-in-law, my wife's dad, had come down with pulmonary fibrosis.
Oh,
you know,
wow.
had never been
I'm
a
sorry.
smoker, had never worked with asbestos, but Jack's dad had. He'd worked in the shipyards in Boston and suffered pulmonary fibrosis. And Jack immediately, on a dime, switched. He says, I get that. That's a terrible thing to do. I realize you've got your hands full. And that's how I got him to leave me alone. But anyway, so Ronan finds out about this and he wonders why. It's a husband-wife team. And he was, the firm was Palladino and Sutherland. And Sandra Sutherland, his wife, was the other, you know, investigative boss. And Ronan was thinking, so this guy has a business with his wife, but he's, and, you know, Jack had also done the bimbo eruption thing for Clinton.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay. Yeah. I knew I'd heard his name. Yeah. Oh, it looks like we have a frozen moment.
Oh, we have a frozen moment.
Oh, because this is so interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, darn.
David, I hate it when that happens.
I know we're sitting on the edge of our seat.
Technology issues.
Yes, a little tech. Well, I don't know. Or do you think we're going to get David back here?
I think we probably will.
David, can you hear us? I think it's fascinating that he spent so many years as a PI. I mean, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wow. I mean,
yeah. And you can tell it in his writing, in his novels.
It certainly informs his novels, and it looks like he's going to try to come back.
Yep, he dropped off, and he will drop back in, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. But in the meantime, it's so interesting to me that we've had a number of authors, when I ask about childhood, who have said their parents were readers.
Yes.
And how much that, you know, influenced them to later become writers, that they, you know, were reading, you know, voraciously as children. And so for all of you parents out there,
yes,
please, you know, read to your kids. We need more writers and more thought leaders in the world. And yeah, I thought that was
take the pad out of their hands and hand them a book, or get them the app on the pad that will let them read books, one or the other.
That's right. That's right.
And it's a good lesson for writers also who are, you know, who are working on a manuscript or who have been published or whatever. And any writer will tell you this: read. You have to read. That's your school.
Absolutely. And when people tell me they want to be a writer, and I'll say, do you read? How much do you read? And they say, well, I'm not really a reader. Well, you need to go back to ground zero, because that's where you got to start.
And they pointed that out when he was talking. He said only then did he start reading critically. And that was kind of a cryptic little statement, and it probably went right by a lot of people. But once you start writing, you read books differently than you ever. Trust me, reading for pleasure is gone.
No, you read.
You're reading because you're in school. Exactly, you're learning.
People say to me, "Well, I bet you read fast." I'm like, "No, actually, I read very slowly."
Exactly,
because I go back and I'll look at how an author created something, how they structured it. Could be sentences, could be, you know, a passage in a book, to see how they pulled off whatever it is that's extraordinary with the work that they've done. So yeah, you do you do read very differently. My children won't go to the movies with me because if it's a bad movie, I'll be, well, there's the end of act one. They're like, Mom, be quiet. So they don't like
Well, while we're seeing if Dave's going to make it back, let me talk about a couple of things, and I want to get
Yes.
I want to get I want to show these things. This here he is, here he is, here he is.
Oh, is
All
he
right,
back?
he's back.
Probably just take a moment for him to connect.
Yeah.
Were you going to talk about Outliers?
And I was going to show him. I was going to show some of his books and talk about them. Looks like he's reconnected. We're just waiting on the video and audio to come up.
Yeah, yeah.
The technical issues of Zoom. We zoom in, we zoom out, and sometimes we zoom into a wall.
I think we just zoomed into a wall at my
And
phone.
Dave lives in a very rural area, as he says,
Right.
up in upstate New York. And
Well, here's the, can you hear me okay?
yes, we hear you.
Yes, we can't see you, but
Okay,
we
here
can
we go.
hear
The
you.
video, no, I'm trying to, there we go.
There you go. Up.
Here we go.
There you go. You're back. Okay.
Yes.
Right now I mean, I didn't think about this and I should have. I'm upstairs on wireless. Now I can go downstairs and plug directly into the Ethernet if you'd like to resume that way. Shall we do that?
Yes.
Go downstairs.
Whatever you want to do. Or yeah.
Okay, let me do that and I'll be right back.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Do we want to stop recording and then
we're going to show some of your book covers and talk about them, and then we'll talk to you about them.
Okay.
Okay.
What I've got, oh shoot, I'm going to have to shut the whole thing down.
I tell you what, let's just ride with it like it is and see what happens.
I think that's fine.
Because it's working fine right now.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, yeah, I have to, Dave and I have known each other for a number of years, and we've sat in bars and swapped lies many, 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 many times. But we've also taught together in many venues, and I remember one great class where we dissected Chinatown, and one of the great things. But every writer out there needs to read this book here, because I think it's one of the Bibles as far as learning how to create characters and make them believable. And tell us about this, Dave. How did this come about? And wow, I mean, just thanks for doing this.
It started as an online class that I taught through UCLA's Writers Project. And, I had to do 10 lectures. And so, and I wrote them out, because if you write at that time, the way you did it was you wrote out a lecture and then you would talk about it with the class online. And I thought, well, I've written these 10 chapters, what am I going to do with them? Just put them in a drawer or something? So I raised it with my agent. She was not terribly receptive. She goes, writing books, I can get you at best $3,000 from Writer's Digest. I just don't think I can do better than that. I said, give me a shot. I'm going to try to write something that is more than anybody else ever tried to do before, cover more terrain in more different ways. And when I sent it to her, she goes, oh, wow, this really is different. She managed to get a better deal from Penguin Random House. I think it was just Penguin at the time. And that was the story of that. It started as a course. And then as I was writing it, I kept on thinking, having to come up with better examples or, more in-depth thinking about what I was trying to say. And, it was a reckoning of my own about how to do characters and how to do them well. And
well, it worked. It's very, very good.
Fabulous book.
Two of my favorite books that you wrote, though, were The Devil's Redhead and Done for a Dime. I mean, that was some of your earlier work, and they're both just so well done. And
I was just downhill from there.
Not necessarily, because you also wrote this, which was fantastic. Tell us how this came about. How did you come up with this concept?
Well, talk about returning to my childhood. There was a show about Wyatt Earp on when I was a kid. And Doc Holliday was the character that fascinated me. And I just thought of him, I think of him as the primordial American anti-hero, in that he's not a good guy, but he's not really a bad guy. but he definitely chooses the line of the law he wants to be on based on his loyalty, not on abstractions such as truth, beauty, and the American way. And, I always thought of that as kind of fascinating. And then I found out when I was doing some research when I was in college, I think, that he had had a lifelong correspondence with his cousin, Maddie, and that the Holiday family was related to Margaret Mitchell, who wrote Gone with the Wind.
Mhm.
And it's unclear on whether these letters were love letters or simply correspondence between two people who were very fond of each other. The family always maintained, no, they were just dear friends. But after Doc died, his belongings were sent to Georgia, to her, not to the woman who had been his supposed common law wife, Kate Elder. And by this time she was a nun. She had joined the Sisters of Mercy. Interesting side story. She could have been a nun earlier, but that would have required entering the convent in the North. And she hated the North with such a profound passion that she would not do it until, I believe it was Charleston. There was finally an opening at the convent in Charleston. Her mother had basically protected the family from Yankee soldiers during the Sherman's March to the Sea in Georgia.
Wow. Yeah.
So she was a I think she called herself an unreconstructed rebel. This little nun. But I thought, as a novelist, as we're always taught to raise the stakes. Well, no, of course they were love letters. Of course they were. And that's why she destroyed them.
Ah.
Or did she?
Love it. Yes.
That was kind of the premise. I thought, well, what if these letters were found, and how valuable would they be, and to whom?
Mhm.
And that was sort of where the story kind of took off. And the best compliment I got, I got some nice press and everything, but my favorite compliment was from Kimberly Cameron, who was my agent at the time, who said, "Where did you find these letters?" I said, "I wrote them." And I've had other people sit there and just go, "Wow, are these in an archive somewhere?" I said, "No, I'm good at voice."
Yeah, obviously.
And when I first read it, that I thought they were real too for a while, and then I finally realized what you were doing, and of course Kimberly told me. But the point is that they were so real and so believable. And
Otto Penzler thought they went on too long. Nobody wrote letters that long back then. And I wanted to reply, how many letters from the 19th century have you read, Otto? Because they didn't have TV, they didn't have radio.
Exactly.
They didn't have telephones they could just pick up, and especially after long periods of time, there's a lot to catch up on.
Right.
A little interesting sidelight about this is that for a time, Sister Melanie that's the name she chose. And what's interesting about that is Melanie was the first cousin, was betrothed to her first cousin, and only cut it off to become a nun. Well, guess who Sister Melanie's first cousin was? Doc Holliday.
Oh, wow.
So she chose that name. And what name did Margaret Mitchell choose for the virtuous sister? Melanie.
Ah, interesting.
So there's all these little connections that were just fascinating. That was a book where, trust me, research, rat hole.
Yeah.
There's always more to find out. And in something like that there's people saying, "Oh no, that 6-shooter couldn't do it," or such. You'll get letters.
Right.
But it was just a gas to write. On an interesting note, so I just got a note from a reader of that book that I found incredibly interesting. His name is Admiral James Stavridis. He's retired. He used to be the Supreme Commander of NATO. At the time I met him, he was the head of U.S. Southern Command in Miami. And I received an email. This is after Blood of Paradise, my third book came out, and it takes place in El Salvador. And I get an email, it just says, "David, love the book." The subject line was Blood of Paradise. "Love the book. Before I write more, just want to confirm this is a valid email address. Best, Jim." And I'm saying, "No, that's Admiral James Stavridis." And I'm going, "I so screwed. Somebody's going to be a bump, bump, bump in the door going, Mr. Corbett, will you come with us, please? And but he loved the book, and he actually made it part of his reading list for the officers at the U.S. Southern Command. And he invites me down to give a talk. You know, the little lefty liberal from Berkeley, you know, talking in front of
That was so calm.
these military folks, the U.S. Southern Command. And I'm standing there in this, I'm seriously auditorium-sized room with people in it. And they were looking at me like, come on, sucker, make my day. And the first words out of my mouth were, don't I get a lawyer? Woman at the end of the room goes, here I am. So apparently Jag was there. But he wrote, he said he just read the Doc Holliday book and said, you know, having been in some combat situations, I can assure you that your combat sequence was incredibly credible and really well done. I said, and of course, I love the letters. So that was
so cool. So what are you working on now?
I'm a follow-up to my last book. That was The Truth Against the World, which was a real departure, not only from everything I had done, but everything I think anyone else had tried to do, because they weren't as stupid as I was for trying this. But it's sort of a step into dystopian fiction, and takes place during an American Civil War, and an Irish janitor befriends a very gifted but psychologically fragile artist and poet who writes a masterpiece as a present to her professor, who's also her lover. He then breaks things off cruelly, sends her into a depressive tailspin, sneaks money to her mother so she'll stay institutionalized, while he publishes the book under his own name, becomes an international sensation, and inspiration for a video game that becomes a recruiting device for militias. And she finds this out, and she just says, I have to confront him. I have to find him. I have to confront him. And so they have to, it ends up that the address they have for him is in California. They're in Philadelphia. So they have to cross the entire country while it's basically coming apart, find this guy and try to achieve some kind of justice. And that's
so what, you couldn't find a convoluted plot for this?
Oh, trust me.
That's fantastic.
Worse. And not only that, but the great reveal, and this was a heartwarming moment. I don't know if you know Don Moss, the agent.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes, we know Don well.
We went to lunch at Left Coast Crime, and he said, David, this book. I mean, I read a page and I had to pause and going, wow. Okay. I mean, so I didn't stop. I mean, okay, then I'd pause again. That's Fergus, the aforementioned dog. And it just, you were just blowing my mind all the time. This was like Pynchon, just easier. You should put that on the cover, like reading Thomas Pynchon, just easier. And but he also, the test was, there's a key reveal in the book. Would you like to meet Fergus?
Sure. Bring Fergus along. You know, we want to get to know you. He's obviously a big part of your life.
My wife may be returning or something. But anywho, that's Fergus doing his
thing.
He's a watchdog.
Sidekick.
He watches to eat. Where was I?
Don Moss.
Again?
Don Moss. You were talking about Don Moss.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a key reveal in the book that, I mean, the truth of the matter is, if I wanted to tell you what the book is really about, I'd tell you that, but then it would ruin the book.
Right.
And so when I said, said, I'm reading and I'm seriously, and suddenly I get to that one line, I go, good. I wanted to make sure that you didn't see that coming. And the fact that somebody as keen a reader as he was,
oh yeah,
there and went, oh, now, okay, good. I did something. I did something well. I've earned my cookie.
There you go. There you go. Your milk and cookies and your blankie. So what's next? Are you working on something else or
follow up to that? I take it about 20 years further on. And America has broken apart into basically independent city-states.
Okay.
And he has a quest, which I don't want to get into. He has someone he has to find and has no idea how to go about it,
Wow.
but has to go to these various city-states that are, heavily guarded. The working title is Sovereign Criminals, the pun on the sovereign individual methodology,
Yeah.
but here it's like gangs are pretty much taken over the cities, or whether they're gangs or just very clever and well-connected industry folks, as, for example,
Interesting.
San Francisco just becomes a tech mega center. And Berkeley becomes sort of like Rojava. I don't know, that the Syrian Kurdish enclave
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
in the south of Turkey, and Bethel Island, or the
Yes.
Inner Valley becomes basically an enclave of basically sort of flyover country. It's the people
Interesting.
that
Yeah.
hated the federal government, had nothing to do with it, and believe in Bible and tradition. And so those are three of the mega cities that he's going to have to negotiate. And,
so your protagonist is basically a futuristic dystopian commando PI.
not a PI. He's a janitor.
Yeah, but he functions as a PI.
He's an ex-military veteran.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he makes the point the Irish have been fighting America's wars since the very beginning, and
Yeah.
he's very well versed on that, and he will more than happily tell you all about it, and does in certain sections of the book. The Battle of Gettysburg, in particular.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, David.
The Philadelphia 69th saved the Republic that day.
Wow. I'm gonna have to look that up. That's very interesting.
Cut off Pickett's charge just long enough. The other troops backed up, and they were exposed. And they had, before the battle, had picked up the weapons of the dead, and so they wouldn't have to reload. They could just fire, and then they got to hand-to-hand combat,
Oh,
and held them off long enough for reinforcements finally to reemerge to the front.
yeah.
Lee's artillery barrage was not as misguided as people like to believe. I mean, it really did some serious damage. And I mean, the thousands and thousands of men who came up that hill, they could have taken that hill, but it was fierce fighting. And the thing about the Philadelphia 69th, they took their number from the New York 69th, which the original Irish Brigade. And that was formed by Thomas Marr, who'd taken place in the 1848 rebellion in Ireland against the English. As always, the Irish Rebellion failed. Notoriously good at that until 1916. And he got exiled to Tasmania, as one would, and managed to escape, came to the United States and became an orator, to Irish crowds. And with the Irish Brigade, though, he saw an opportunity to form a military unit, train Irish recruits in combat, so that they could return to Ireland and renew the rebellion. The problem was the Irish troops are always placed in the forefront because they were some of the most enthusiastic warriors that they had. They were also Southern Irish units. And the reason they kept the Irish together was because in the war of the Mexican-American War, Irish had, a group of Irish had defected and joined the Mexican side. They're called the St. Patrick's Regiment. And the officers of that war became the generals of the Civil War. And they knew how fiercely the Irish would fight if kept together. And there were two main ways of Irish to emigrate into America. It was Boston and New York, Philadelphia for the North, and Charleston and New Orleans to the South. And the two major Irish regiments at the South were from Louisiana and South Carolina. And I think it was at Fredericksburg, the South Carolina Irish Regiment was face to face with the New York Irish Brigade, and they knew each other. They were shooting at people they knew.
Well, yeah.
So that was one of the things where I go, okay, I'm going to have an Irish guy who's a military guy who understands American and Irish history in and out. He's sort of a walking encyclopedia, and for reasons which I can't disclose. But
That's what happens when you start researching something. You get
Oh,
so
yes.
deep and so many tunnels and so many rabbit holes,
I
and you
call,
learn a lot more than you wanted to learn,
yeah,
right?
I
Yeah,
call it, I call it the most creative form of writer's block.
It's, yeah, procrastinating through research, right?
exactly.
But David, you are a fantastic interview. We're going to have you back. You're really great, so knowledgeable, and I mean, your work is phenomenal. So thank you so much for being with us and being on Get to Know. I also want to ask our viewers to please click that thumbs up. It helps with the algorithms and gets these interviews out into the world. And we want to also ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That also helps build us up and lets us bring more interviews to you.
Well, Dave, thanks. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. We always have good discussions and more intellectual than people might think sometimes, and probably less intellectual than we hoped, right?
Well, we haven't talked about, give me a second. I'm at that age where
Yeah.
Alabama, the coach, Nick Saban.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
That's
haven't
okay.
talked about that yet.
Yeah. The only thing for sure is we can still beat Ohio State. Even with a new coach.
We
But
shall see.
yes,
We
maybe,
shall
maybe
see.
if you guys make it that far. Okay. This we have this battle all the time. But when your next book is reaching fruition for sure, we want to get you back and talk about it and promote that and chit chat and have more fun. So yeah. We appreciate it. Thank you. And we appreciate you listening in to Get to Know here on the Outliers YouTube channel. And we will be back with more interviews soon. So until then, hang in there.